In the heart of old London, beneath the smoke and the rain, there were steps. Cold, gray and forgotten, but to a handful of souls they were home. Each morning the city woke to the sound of boots and bells, but down on those stone stairs, another kind of life began, slower, quieter, stitched together by hunger, laughter, and something the world mistook for weakness: hope. There was Scotty, the woman who once kept books and now kept faith alive with numbers that no longer mattered. William, the boy who traded pride for purpose. Hannah, whose cough sounded like a prayer no one finished. And you, the silent witness to it all. This is their story. A tale of tea brewed from used leaves, of blankets shared like miracles, of dignity found not in riches, but in the refusal to surrender. A story of how even the smallest kindness, a cup, a coin, a single word, can balance the world for one more night. So close your eyes. Let the rain fall, the carriages fade, and the lamplight flicker over wet stone. Tonight, on Old Worlds for Sleep, we return to the step that remembered, and to the people who proved that even in the darkest corners of a city, light can still belong to those who have the least of it. London wakes gray and damp, as though the city itself has been weeping through the night. You stand beneath the soot-stained arch of the workhouse, watching the mist curl over the street like breath from a tired lung. The morning smells of coal and cabbage water, and the sound of carriage wheels mixes with the steady drip of last night's rain. This is the hour when the city begins to stir, when bakers light their ovens and clerks hurry to offices. But here on the steps, time moves differently. The stones are still wet from the drizzle. They hold the cold like memory, pressing it through the thin cloth of your coat until it settles somewhere deep behind the ribs. Around you, the others wake slowly. Mary rubs her hands together for warmth. James coughs into a rag that was once white. Old Elizabeth mutters a prayer she said so often it has worn smooth with repetition. No one speaks of hunger, it is the one thing always understood. You look across the street at the shop windows just beginning to glow with lamplight. Behind the glass, mannequins stand dressed in fine wool, shoes polished until they mirror the light. Their stillness feels cruelly elegant against the damp shuffle of the living outside. Yet none of you avert your eyes. Looking costs nothing, and even longing can warm the heart for a moment or two. A bell rings somewhere up the road, church, factory, or school, it's hard to tell. It marks a beginning for someone, though not for you. For the forgotten, mornings do not bring fresh starts, only fresh weather. Still, the ritual continues. Mary passes around the tin pot, the one dented beyond shape but never discarded. Each of you adds what you can: half a crust, a pinch of tea leaves, a few drops of yesterday's milk turned sour. By the time the last contribution joins the rest, it is enough for a thin brew that smells faintly of comfort. Elizabeth calls it the morning's dignity. Not breakfast, never that, the word belongs to better tables, but dignity. A small ceremony to remind yourselves that you are not beasts, that even in rags, a person can share warmth, offer a sip, speak a kind word. It's strange how often kindness appears when everything else has gone missing. Across the street, a carriage splashes through a puddle, drenching the hem of your coat. The driver doesn't look down, and the passenger inside, lace-gloved, veil drawn, doesn't see you at all. You could vanish from the street and nothing would change in their day. Yet you remain. You breathe. You endure. Someone hums softly, a lullaby meant for children but now reclaimed by those who have none. The melody weaves through the fog like thread through worn cloth, holding the group together. James finds harmony, rough but tender, and even you join quietly, the sound vibrating against the cold air. For a moment, it feels almost like belonging. When the song fades, the silence that follows isn't empty. It's full of the small things that keep life moving: the scrape of tin on stone, the slow sipping of tea, the sigh that might be a prayer. Above the rooftops, the fog begins to lift just enough to reveal a thin stripe of pale gold where the sun is trying to break through. You follow its light along the wet cobblestones, wondering, not for the first time, what lies beyond this street, beyond the endless fight for warmth and bread. But the thought drifts away as easily as the steam from your cup. The day will bring what it always brings: a search for work, a search for food, a search for anything that lets you say, I am still here. And in the quiet between breaths, you realize that survival itself, this stubborn refusal to disappear, is a kind of grace, perhaps even a kind of prayer. By the time the church bells mark 10, the city is fully awake. The sound of horses, boots, and iron wheels fills the narrow street. Somewhere, A baker's chimney exhales its first scent of bread, and for a moment you could almost imagine the world gentle again. But hunger has a way of making even the sweetest smells feel cruel. Elizabeth tucks the teapot under her shawl, preserving its fading warmth. Later, she says, though there's rarely a later worth saving for. Then you see her. At first, only the outline through the fog, tall, thin, a shape moving with quiet purpose. As she draws nearer, the gray of her coat becomes clear, its fabric worn to the shine of stone. She carries herself differently from the rest. Shoulders back. Chin lifted, though the weather bites and the crowd presses. Scotty, someone murmurs. The name moves like a current through the group. She settles on the edge of the steps, careful not to touch anyone's things. Her face is sharp from hunger, yet there's a composure about her that refuses to bend. You've seen that look before, in clerks who once kept ledgers and teachers dismissed when schools closed. People trained to live by order, now surviving by endurance. You offer her a sip from the tin cup. She hesitates only a second before accepting. "Thank you," she says, her voice crisp, still carrying the faint trace of schooling. The sound surprises you, clean vowels among the worn accents of the street. "Been here long?" you ask. She shakes her head. "Since Michaelmas," she replies. "It wasn't meant to last." Her eyes drift to the gutter where yesterday's rain still runs black with soot. Nothing ever is down here. No one interrupts. Conversation among your kind is a delicate thing. Words are ration like tea. Too many and you might wake old griefs that prefer to sleep. "Used to keep books," she says after a pause. "At the army stores in Pimlico. 7 shillings a week, regular work." The number sounds like treasure. But her tone carries no boast, only disbelief that such days ever existed. "What happened?" you ask quietly. "The same as for most," she answers. "Fell behind on rent. Landlord took the room, the bed, the little clock I'd brought from home. Went to a lodging house. Woke one morning to find my clothes gone. Every stitch but this." She plucks at her gray coat. "Couldn't work without clothes, could I? Couldn't even look for work. After that, there's not much to tell." Her voice doesn't break, but something in it trembles, a fine crack beneath polished stone. You wonder what it must feel like to lose everything but pride, and to carry that still through the filth and rain. "Do you think you'll go back?" you ask. "To work?" she replies. "If I could. I'd rather my hands blistered with labor than sit useless on these steps." A silence follows, but it isn't empty. Everyone listening knows the truth behind her words, that idleness here isn't a choice, but a punishment written into the city's design. And then, almost as if summoned by her determination, a man emerges from the nearby coffee shop. He's well-dressed, middle-aged, his face creased by years of accounting rather than hunger. "Water for tea?" he calls to you, noticing the pot in your hands. "Yes, please," you answer. "If it's no trouble." He nods, but before turning inside, his eyes settle on Scotty. "You're the Scottish lady, aren't you? From near the steps." "I am," she replies, her posture straightening. "Sarah mentioned you could read and write. I could use help with some books. Just an afternoon or two, nothing regular." You feel your breath catch. "6 pence," he says when pressed. A fortune in the language of the poor. Will she accept? You wonder. Or will pride steal the chance? "I'll be here," Scotty says at last, her voice steady. "Tomorrow afternoon." The man nods and disappears inside with the teapot. You and Scotty stand silent for a moment, the steam from your hands rising between you like a small blessing. Then she looks at you and smiles, not with joy but with something harder to name. "It's a beginning," she says. And in that moment, under the gray sky and the smell of wet stone, you almost believe her. Morning arrives pale and tired, as if London itself has not slept. The fog clings to the workhouse gates, heavier than before, and the air smells faintly of ashes and damp wool. You wake to the slow shuffle of movement. Mary adjusting her shawl, James coughing into the mist, Elizabeth whispering her prayer. And there, on the upper step, Scotty sits already awake, smoothing her gray coat with nervous hands. She's washed her face in last night's rainwater, tied her hair back as neatly as the city allows. The shawl she found at the mission drapes her shoulders, patchwork but proud. She looks almost like her former self, though none of you ever saw that version. "Big day," you say softly. She nods, eyes fixed ahead. "It feels strange," she admits, "having somewhere to be. Elizabeth pours what's left of the tea, thin and bitter, but still warm enough to count as kindness. Work's work, she says, handing Scotty her share. Better to be tired than idle. The others murmur in agreement, though behind their smiles you sense a quiet envy. For most here, fortune is something that happens to other people. But today even envy feels gentler, more like shared hope than resentment. The city is fully alive by the time Scotty stands. The gas lamps dim pale against the morning light, and shop shutters rattle open one by one. She hesitates at the bottom of the steps, as if afraid the street might refuse her. "You'll do fine," you tell her. Numbers never judge. That makes her laugh, a sound soft but startling in this gray air. "Perhaps not," she says, "but men do." You watch her walk away, the gray coat blending into the fog until she seems part of it. One more ghost moving through London's endless hunger. Hours pass. The day stretches long and uncertain. William returns from the market with a bruised apple and word of another day's work. Mary mends a torn hem with thread stolen from a tailor's trash. Life, as ever, continues in small circles. But your thoughts remain with Scotty. You picture her in the coffee shop's back room, hands trembling as she opens the dusty ledgers, breathing the smell of ink and stale sugar. You imagine her fingers tracing faded columns of numbers, finding rhythm in the order they once gave her life. When she returns, the light is fading. The sky bleeds pale pink through the fog, and the first lamps flicker to life. She walks slower than usual, but her eyes are alive again. "Well?" Elizabeth asks, her voice carrying the careful hope of those who've learned not to expect good news. Scotty lowers herself onto the step, breath clouding in the cold. "The books were chaos," she says finally. "Years of neglect. No proper record of payments, no order at all. But I've made a start." "And Mr. Parker?" you ask. She smiles faintly. "He was pleased. Asked if I'd come again Friday." Another sixpence. The group falls silent, the words hanging in the air like smoke from a candle. It's not just about money, it's the idea that something begun might continue. That the world might just once say yes instead of no. "What will you do with it?" Mary asks, her tone curious, not covetous. "Save," Scotty answers. "For a room someday. For proper clothes. For being someone again." A thin breeze sweeps down the street, stirring the edges of her shawl. The workhouse clock tolls 6. The sound seems softer tonight, as though even the bells are listening. You share the evening tea, weaker than ever but sweeter for what it represents. Across the street, the fog begins to lift just enough for the first stars to blink through. "Do you think it'll last?" you ask her quietly. Scotty looks toward the dim glow of the coffee shop window, still warm against the cold dark. "No," she says after a pause. "But I'll make it last as long as I can." And for a moment, in the hush of that London twilight, her voice sounds like something sacred. Not faith, not prayer, but the quiet defiance of survival. The next morning begins with the same fog that has lingered for days, though this time, it feels heavier, like the sky itself has given up holding back its tears. You wake to the sound of water dripping from the eaves above, a slow rhythm tapping against the cracked stones where you sleep. Scotty's place beside you is empty. She left before dawn to return to the shop. The thought of her inside those warm, coffee-scented walls makes you oddly comforted and lonely all at once. The rain begins softly, almost tenderly at first. Then, as the city stirs awake, it grows bold, falling in sheets that blur the edges of the world. London becomes a watercolor painting left too long in the rain. You pull your thin blanket tighter and watch puddles form along the gutter, rippling with every passing carriage. The cold seeps into your bones until you feel more water than flesh. Elizabeth sits up, adjusting the shawl over her shoulders. "It'll flood again," she murmurs. Her voice sounds resigned, as if this isn't weather but destiny. Mary nods in silence, helping Hannah sit upright against the wall. The old woman's cough comes sharp and hollow, shaking her small frame. You reach out, steadying her back until the spasm passes. "Tea?" you whisper. Mary checks the dented pot, empty except for a few damp leaves. "We'll need to fetch more," she says. But no one moves. Not yet. The rain feels like a wall between you and the rest of the world. By midday, the water gathers at the bottom of the steps, reflecting the iron gates of the workhouse like a warped mirror. You hear footsteps then, a new constable younger than Burke, his uniform too clean for these streets. He stops at the edge of the steps, hands clasped behind his back, gaze stern but uncertain. "You can't stay here," he says briskly. "Orders from above. Workhouse inspection this afternoon." Elizabeth squints up at him. "Inspection of what? Misery?" The constable flinches but holds his ground. "The place must look proper," he insists. "Move along, all of you." You rise slowly, heart thudding. "Move along where?" "Not my concern," he says, turning away before you can answer. For a long moment, no one speaks. The rain does the talking, steady, unkind, endless. Then Elizabeth sighs and begins gathering her things. A cracked mug, a bundle of rags, her Bible wrapped in paper. "Come on," she mutters. "We'll find another archway till they're gone." It takes all your strength to lift Hannah to her feet. Her breathing is labored, her hands cold as stone. Mary takes one side, you take the other, and together you shuffle down the slick street. Water rushes along the curb like a river, carrying bits of straw and the